then over these last 20 years, pulling it through with the resilience report, have you seen the themes of either environmental design or environmental sustainable impact be woven increasingly into your customers' messaging or even into their overall business practices? Has this been an evolution over the past 20 years? I'd love to know kind of what that trajectory has looked like.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that. I think the evolution, I would say, is it seemed to be a lot more picky and choosy of which industries or what sectors were really interested in it or talking about it and how advanced they were in talking about it. So I mentioned, very early on, I worked in the, contract office furniture space. Well, sustainability conversation in terms of the built environment, LEED certification of office buildings, things of that sort, that's been around for quite a long time. I mean, I remember, more than 20 years ago, we're selling office chairs that were fully recyclable and on and on. But then, frankly, some of our flexible packaging clients, they've been talking about sustainability for maybe 5-8 years in a meaningful way, and in both of the cases that I'm thinking of, they were like the only ones in their space doing so. So it seems like so now it's like it's more universal, but I think people are still at different phases along that path of just kind of recognizing that there's a problem and maybe they're a part of it to actually being a bit more sophisticated in terms of how they think about it and talk about it.
I think too, part of the problem for a lot of those folks who are thinking about the sustainability message, they're thinking about the environmental footprint of their product and what they create and who they sell to, only really becomes a thing for their customers when it becomes a thing for their customers' customers.
Absolutely.
So when somebody comes to you and says, if you don't have sustainable packaging, we're no longer going to buy your stuff, all of a sudden they start going to their suppliers of packaging and saying, you guys have that sustainable stuff, right? Like, it's going to be recyclable, right? And now it's all about that. Yeah,
but up until then, the fact that it's 20% more costly is the deal breaker, right? Until that customer starts demanding it. Yeah, so I think you're quite right, Jeff. It does kind of depend on that push-pull of, and when we mentioned the built environment, I mean, a lot of that marketing messaging is kind of served into the architect and design community, referred to as the A&D community. Well, they're pretty lefty by general sensibility. It's certainly, environmental considerations very much front and center in their world. So in order to sell into that world, well, I mean, think about like interface carpet. How old is that story, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean,
Absolutely.
I won't belabor the point.
Well, it is interesting. So when you're mentioning the worlds of kind of coexisting, of telling that message of sustainability and what companies are doing and advertising, certainly the theme or the concern of greenwashing comes up. Is this something that you're able or need to support your customers? Do they ever come to you with questions around greenwashing considerations? And if so, do you go anywhere to consider, for example, what are the regulations in a Canadian landscape? Or is the B2B market maybe a little bit more sheltered from these conversations, at least for right now?
I would say most customers are really afraid of going near it if they feel like they're going to be greenwashing anything. So the ones that are comfortable talking about it, they have either their spec line item detail about their product that they know meets international standards for sustainability, etc. Or they are maybe a member of a industry sustainability council where their overall practices are audited and things of that sort. So they have some things that they can kind of lean on and support their claims. So I find that I don't think I've ever had a client come to me and say, here's a really kind of sneaky greenwashing message. Can I get away with this? It's been more the opposite. It's more like, we start peeling back the stories about what they're actually doing that they're not telling. And we kind of say, guys, like, we can talk about this. Like, the fact that you've reduced your electrical consumption in your factory by 40% because of the addition of wind power, this is something we can actually talk about. Like, why aren't we mentioning it? So yeah.
Well, there's so many that are, as the customer's customer, thing starts to come into play, they realize that our clients' customers are able to incorporate those sustainability components in their overall supply chain green messaging, which of course is part of it. It's not just what comes out of your own factory, but it's about what is coming into that factory beforehand, on the supply chain basis that is pretty important. One of the things that I think is pretty interesting about it, and Carman kind of alluded to this a bit around this idea that, they're stating the spec and the letter of the quality of the product or what have you, as opposed to kind of leading with that message, X% reduction in overall greenhouse gas or whatever. Instead of leading with that, what they're leading with typically, because I think especially in kind of the packaging space, there are concerns that recyclable alternatives are not necessarily as high quality and are going to reflect more poorly on the end product because of that. There's clarity issues or feel issues or printing concerns. So they're focusing more on like, how have they optimized that product in order to achieve or even outpace the competitive products that were not recyclable? How can they meet the same level of standard? How can they create something that is as good a quality in that space? And so that is often the messaging that they're touting, and then trying to show that it can be had. That pricing conversation frequently comes into it as well. This can't be 40% more expensive just to meet the needs of Walmart. So,
yeah.
Or actually, in that case, maybe it can be, but
yeah.
Certain large end customers can carry a lot of weight in terms. You do mention this idea of messaging then. So what role do you think marketing and communications people, professionals, have in terms of sustainability and the value of storytelling as we do transition towards more environmental or socially sound solutions?
Well, I mean, they are the chief storyteller after all, right? So I guess the role becomes one more of making sure that that story has some validation to it and some proof points associated with it. And I mean, you started earlier about asking about different regulations or how people may, and I guess that's one way to stay on the right side of the conversation, is just to go by the letter of the law. I think most marketing communications professionals are pretty okay with leaning in further than that and making sure that they're, let the legal team decide if things are meeting the letter of the law. How are you doing in terms of meeting the spirit of your commitments and the spirit of your corporate values and those that you're wanting to hang your hat on publicly with your investors and key stakeholders, et cetera? And that, I think in most cases, that will be a higher bar to be holding yourself to than the regulatory bar. And I think that's the role of marketing communications. I don't envy it necessarily. It's not an easy one. I think sometimes you can sound like you're having very nuanced, almost non-businessy conversations with CFOs that are like, what does this have to do with making us more money anyway? But I'd like to think in the environmental space we're getting beyond that kind of back and forth, but maybe not.